Hey, it's Tree and I'm back for another video. Today I just wanted to talk about this question that keeps popping up in the webcomic sphere, and that's if you're ready to make a webcomic, or if your art is good enough to make a webcomic. One of my biggest things about this topic is that I don't think you'll ever feel ready to make a comic, and I don't feel like you'll ever feel like your art is good enough to make a comic, mostly just because it's something you've never done before, and that's kind of scary when you're jumping into something new. But I kind of do have some advice. If you're scared that your art isn't good enough to make a comic, one of the things I want to reassure you about is that your art's gonna improve no matter what while you're making your comic. Sometimes the art improves page after page. Take, for example, Wakefield. The first few pages aren't as good as the pages that I'm drawing now. I didn't really think my art would ever look like this. One of the things that affected my art so much, though, was just the fact that I was drawing things that I never drew before. Mostly because I never found any reason why to draw this kind of stuff. So, for example, cars. I'm not crazy about cars. I never see a reason why to draw them, but you need to draw them when it comes to like city scenes and things like that. Or the fact that I never really have drawn people sitting on couches and chairs. I've never drawn tents because I don't go camping. Another thing that probably affected my art was that I would take long periods of breaks in between each pages, which can be a good thing and also not a bad thing. But yes, your comic will improve over time, and the beginning pages aren't going to look anything like the newer pages, so there's no harm in starting now. And that's the basic idea that I have. Another thing is that some people probably feel like their writing isn't good enough. And again, that's just something that improves over time. I can say, though, that it's a good idea to have a good amount of the story written before you draw it. That's one of the mistakes I made when I first started making my comic, was that I just started posting right away, and I didn't build up a buffer or anything like that. So again, that made me kind of have to pause working on my comic frequently. Which isn't really a jab on Sunny, it's just that I was really impatient. They weren't done with the story, and I just wanted to go ahead and start making it and posting it. That's my fault. Another thing that people do is that they don't know how much to prepare or make a buffer. And all I can say about that is to do whatever you're more comfortable with. No one can really decide how ready you are. So if you want to make character turnarounds and things like that, go right ahead. For me, I'm usually just good with a full body front view, and that's good enough for me. Some people, they do really detailed thumbnails, and most of the time I just whip up something very quick in my sketchbook. There's just so many different ways of doing everything, and the only one that can decide what's enough is just you and the scope of your project. I do think, though, for beginners, it's a good idea to start with something small. Like, for a while, I would do 4-panel, like, small amount of panels. Basically would fit into a page. And that got me used to drawing in the comic format. But also, if you write a very long story, sometimes there's a possibility that along the line of making the story, you'll start losing motivation. But another piece of advice I have is that you should do something you're passionate about, no matter what length it is, because if you're passionate about it, you'll be more willing to work on it for longer amounts of time. Again, the longer the story is, the more time you'll have to spend making pages, whether that's a couple months or a couple of years, and that's just something you have to keep in mind. Because again, you don't really realize the scope of the story until you're starting to make it, and you can lose passion. Regardless of all of that, no matter what you start with, it's good to have buffers because you can take a break and not have to worry about a new post for that week. Or if you do a whole batch or a whole chapter and wait to post it, then you'll have time to rest before making more. That's just kind of how I approached making chapter 2, and it kind of worked out better for me because I could take as long as I wanted. And if I got tired or burnt out from working on Wakefield, I was able to take a break and work on some of my other stuff. 'Cause Lord knows I have too much stuff to work on. Another thing that buffers are good for is if you're a student, because then you'll have posts ready and you can work on your schoolwork if you were not anticipating a huge project coming out of nowhere. It happens, that's just how it is. Another part of prep that I don't think people think about is how much stuff goes into publishing it on a platform like Webtoons or Tapas. For Tapas, you have to have a book cover, you have to have an icon, and it's optional to have an ad banner or a banner for your webtoon. Your Tapas comic. And Webtoon, you have to have an icon, and that's about it. But the thing is that Tapas and Webtoons both have different dimensions. And when I first started Wakefield, I didn't really think of that. I kind of do my pages at a really big size so that way I can scale them down to the required sizes of Webtoons and Tapas panels. Another thing that people think about is if they're going to go to traditional publishing, and to do that, you kind of have to think about CMYK colors and the sizing again, because if you don't have the right sizes, it's going to cut off some of your art. And if you don't make the pages big enough, they're going to be kind of blurry when you blur them to a size bigger than what is needed. There's also the question of how complex you want your pages to be, because I know on Webtoons in particular, some people don't do backgrounds except for important scenes. Some people do black and white comics. It just depends how much time you want to spend on it. Some people even take a more realistic style and make it more simple so that way they're faster to draw. And again, it's mostly down to personal preference. I also know some people, they make digital models of the environments their characters are in, and then they just photograph the environments at the angles they need, and that's just how they do things. Or they'll take a template from Clip Studio Paint or something like that. Like, say they don't want to draw a juice box, they can just handpick what kind of juice box they want it to look like. That's just all down to what you personally want your comic to look like. I also know that Webtoons and Tapas in particular, they kind of have a habit of putting like a title card at the beginning of the comic when they post it, and then their social media at the bottom. I'm trying to make those so that way I can have that on Wakefield. But yeah, no one's going to know for you when your comic is ready. It's just down to you and whether you think you're ready or not. And that's all that matters at the end of the day, I think. So, thanks for listening to me ramble, and subscribe if you want to listen to me ramble some more. And I'll see you next time.